Have you ever felt so utterly alone that even your own reflection seemed to belong to someone else? When Eloise arrived in Dust River with nothing but scars both visible and hidden, the entire town turned its back on her. But salvation would come from the most unexpected source, the one man everyone feared to even look in the eye. The man who hadn't spoken a word in 3 years. Dust River, 1885. A harsh sun beat down on the platform as Eloise Morgan stepped off the train. Her once fine dress was travel-worn, her delicate hands raw. The elegant posture of a lady remained, despite the limp she tried to hide. As she passed, mothers pulled children close, men averted their eyes, and shopkeepers suddenly found their shelves needed organizing. Her beautiful face bore the fading evidence of cruelty, a yellowing bruise at her temple, a small scar at her lip. In her eyes, a haunting emptiness spoke of someone who had ceased to expect kindness. "Room for the night?" she asked at the hotel, her voice soft but clear, placing her last coins on the counter. The owner glanced at the money, then at her face, then passed her to the street. "No vacancies," he said, though the keyboard behind him showed otherwise. At the general store, the same story: no bread to sell her, no coffee, nothing. An elderly woman spat on the ground as Eloise passed. A child who smiled at her was yanked away by its mother with harsh whispers about that kind of woman. The sun climbed higher. Eloise's stomach growled, her throat parched. She attempted to wash her face at the town pump, cupping the cool water in grateful hands. A pair of women with laundry baskets took one look and departed, muttering about disease and sin. Eloise caught her reflection in a shop window, a woman of perhaps 30, still beautiful despite everything, with auburn hair escaping its pins and eyes that had once been bright. Eyes that now held something broken. She straightened her shoulders. She had survived worse than the judgment of strangers. She would survive this too. But as the shadows lengthened and the first rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, even her determined spirit faltered. Night was coming. She had nowhere to go, no food, no shelter, and a town full of people who had already decided she was worth less than nothing. As dusk settled, clouds darkened the sky. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Eloise approached the church, its white steeple a beacon against the gathering storm. Surely here in God's house there would be mercy. The pastor's wife met her at the steps, Bible clutched to her chest like armor. "We don't shelter your kind here," she said, her voice sugar-sweet with righteous cruelty. "Please," Eloise whispered, rain now falling steadily, plastering her hair to her face. "I just need somewhere dry until morning." "There's a brothel at the edge of town," the woman replied, her smile never faltering. "I believe they hire women of questionable virtue." The church door closed with firm finality. Lightning split the sky, and the rain became a deluge that matched the tears Eloise could no longer contain. Desperate, she sought shelter in the livery stable, curling among the hay as horses nickered softly in the dark. For a brief moment there was warmth, the sweet smell of hay, and the kindness of animals who judged no one. Then lantern light flooded the space. The livery owner, a big man with hard eyes, yanked her to her feet. "Judge's whore or runaway wife, we don't need your trouble," he snarled, dragging her toward the door. "Please," she begged. "Just until the storm passes." His answer was to shove her out into the mud, tossing her small bag after her. "Get on with you before I call the sheriff." Soaked to the bone, mud clinging to her skirts, Eloise huddled beneath the overhang of the saloon. Inside, men laughed and sang, the piano tinkling a cheerful tune that mocked her misery. She had become invisible, a ghost, a shadow, a woman with no name and no worth. Then she was seen. 2 cowboys, liquid courage making them bold, staggered from the saloon. The taller one spotted her, his smile widening with predatory interest. "Well now," he drawled, approaching her. "Looks like we found ourselves some company for the night, boys." His companion laughed, blocking her escape route. "Bit wet and muddy, but nothing a bath wouldn't fix." The tall one grabbed her arm, fingers digging into flesh still tender from older bruises. His breath, hot with whiskey, made her gag as he forced her toward the dark alley beside the saloon. "No, please," she whispered, struggling weakly, knowing from bitter experience that resistance often made things worse. "Hear that, Jim?" the second man laughed. "The lady says please." As the men cornered her against the rough wall, their laughter drowning her quiet pleas, a shadow fell across the alley entrance. A tall figure stood motionless, his silhouette cut sharp against the rain-washed lamplight. The laughter died. The man gripping Eloise's arm froze, his face draining of color so rapidly it was visible even in the dim light. "Hunt," he whispered, stepping back so quickly he slipped in the mud. "Calder Hunt." Even Eloise, new to town, knew the name. On the train, she'd overheard whispers, the man who killed 12 men in a single night to avenge his family, who hadn't spoken a single word since burying them, whose rage was as quiet and deadly as winter frost. He stood like a statue carved from shadow, his face obscured by his black hat, rain running in rivulets off the brim. He made no move toward a weapon. He didn't speak. He simply waited. "We didn't mean nothing," the second cowboy stammered, already backing away. "Just having some fun. No harm intended." The tall one released Eloise's arm as if it burned him. "Didn't know she was." "Spoken for," he muttered, his earlier bravado evaporated. Calder Hunt didn't acknowledge their excuses. He didn't move. His stillness was somehow more terrifying than any threat, and the men knew it. They scrambled away like frightened boys, nearly falling over each other in their haste to disappear. Only then did Hunt's gaze fall on Eloise. Not with pity, which would have stung her pride, nor with the desire she had come to dread. His eyes held something rarer, recognition of a soul similarly hollowed by loss. They were the eyes of someone who understood what it meant to be reduced to nothing in the eyes of others. He extended his hand, an offering she had no reason to trust and every reason to need. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The rain, the mud, the cold, the hunger, all of it receded. There was only this moment, this choice. Trust a feared stranger or face the night alone. Eloise had spent her life making safe choices, proper choices, obedient choices. And where had it gotten her? Here. Nowhere. Nothing. With trembling fingers she reached out. His hand was large, calloused from work, but his grip as he helped her up was careful, almost gentle. A grip that spoke of controlled strength, of power restrained rather than flaunted. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. Simply inclined his head slightly toward the street, a question in the gesture. Eloise nodded. Yes. Anywhere but here. Calder led her to his horse, a midnight stallion as silent as its master. The animal stood patient in the rain, steam rising from its powerful body. With gentle strength, Calder helped her mount before swinging up behind her. His proximity should have frightened her, a stranger, a feared man. Yet his touch held no threat. He kept a respectful distance despite their shared saddle, his hands on the reins rather than on her. They rode out of town, through sheets of rain that washed away the mud but not the memory of rejection. Lightning illuminated the angry faces that had turned her away, flashing like fevered dreams in the storm. At first, Eloise sat rigid, her spine a taut line of tension. But as miles passed beneath the horse's steady hooves, exhaustion pulled at her bones. The rhythmic movement, the surprising warmth of the horse beneath them, the shelter of Calder's body breaking the wind, all conspired to lull her toward an unwilling surrender. Gradually, unconsciously, she leaned back, her head coming to rest against his chest. His heartbeat, steady and strong, thrummed through her consciousness, the first human contact in months that didn't bring pain. If he noticed, he gave no sign. He simply adjusted his position slightly to better support her weight and continued guiding the horse through the night. The landscape grew wilder, more beautiful in its untamed honesty. The storm began to clear as they climbed higher into the foothills. Mountains rose against the sky, their slopes dark with pine and fir. The rain thinned to mist, then cleared, revealing stars scattered like hope across the vast darkness. The air grew cooler, sharper with the scent of evergreen and earth. The horse's gait changed as the trail steepened, winding through stands of aspen whose leaves whispered secrets in the night breeze. Eloise drifted in and out of awareness, lulled by exhaustion and the strange sense of safety she couldn't explain. She roused fully when the horse halted, blinking to clear her vision. They had crested a ridge. Below, nestled against the mountainside, sat a cabin, simple, sturdy, with light glowing from its windows like a beacon calling travelers home. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth. Calder dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help her down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched earth, stiff from the long ride and weak from hunger. His hands steadied her, supporting her weight without comment until she found her balance. The cabin door stood open, golden light spilling out to meet them. Calder gestured toward it, an invitation, not a command. Eloise took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. The cabin revealed itself in amber firelight, a single room of hewn logs, worn but meticulously clean. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, warming the space and casting dancing shadows on the walls. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs dominated one side of the room, while a narrow bed occupied the corner farthest from the door. A workbench stood under the window, tools arranged with careful precision. someone's home. Not a hideout or a hovel but a place where life was lived deliberately. Calder gestured to one of the chairs at the table, then moved to the iron stove where a pot simmered, filling the cabin with the savory aroma of stew. He served her a generous portion in a blue enamel bowl, adding fresh bread and a mug of coffee before stepping back. Eloise realized he was giving her space, understanding rather than indifference. She ate slowly at first, her shrunken stomach rebelling against sudden fullness, then with hunger that surprised her. When had she last truly felt appetite? When had food last been offered without expectation of payment, whether in coin or other currency? She watched Calder from beneath lowered lashes as he moved to the workbench, picking up something small and wooden that his large hands worked with unexpected gentleness. His profile in the firelight was strong, his expression unreadable. Not young, not old, a man perhaps in his late 30s, with lines of grief etched around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his beard was neatly trimmed, suggesting care rather than vanity. When her bowl was empty, he refilled it without asking, then returned to his work. Later, he prepared a bed for her near the fire, not his own bed, but a pallet made comfortable with clean sheets and warm blankets. A luxury she hadn't dared hope for. He took his place on a simple bedroll near the door, not as captor but as guardian, a respectful distance between them. He removed his boots but nothing else, clearly intending to sleep fully clothed. Eloise lay down, her body aching with fatigue. The fire's warmth seeped into her bones, the first real comfort she'd known in weeks. Despite her weariness, her eyes grew heavy. She woke sometime in the darkness, a silent scream trapped in her throat, the familiar nightmare fading. For a disorienting moment she didn't know where she was. Then the fire's glow oriented her. Calder was awake, watching over her from his place by the door. He didn't speak, didn't approach, just added wood to the fire and returned to his post, a silent promise of safety in a world that had offered none. Eloise's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She turned her face to the wall and slept. Dawn revealed Calder's world, modest but self-sufficient. After a breakfast of cornbread and strong coffee, he led Eloise outside, the morning air crisp with early autumn. A small corral housed 2 horses, the midnight stallion and a gentle chestnut mare. A chicken coop stood nearby, its inhabitants already scratching in their yard beyond, a vegetable garden spread in neat rows, carefully tended despite the harsh mountain soil. A stream ran clear and cold along the property's edge, and a shed that served as both workshop and storage completed the homestead. Everything spoke of careful stewardship, of hands that built and maintained with respect for the land's limitations and gifts. Inside the cabin, Eloise found clothes folded on the chair, simple, practical garments that belonged to someone smaller than Calder. A woman's clothes. Questions filled her mind, but she asked none. There were too many ghosts in his eyes for her to disturb them with curiosity. After washing at the stream, Eloise emerged in her new attire, a faded blue skirt and white blouse, sturdy leather boots. Her old dress, the last remnant of her previous life, was bundled in her arms. Calder, splitting wood with rhythmic precision, paused. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, memory, then was gone. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then returned to his task. Later, she found a metal bucket behind the cabin. Without being asked, she placed her old dress inside. Calder, appearing silently beside her, offered a match. As flames consumed the fabric, something in Eloise's chest loosened, a knot of fear beginning to unravel. In this place, above the world that had rejected her, perhaps she could become someone new. Someone undefined by others' perceptions. That afternoon, she noticed the chicken eggs needed collecting. Without a word, she took up the task, her fingers gentle as she gathered the warm, brown offerings. Calder, watching from the corral where he brushed down the horses, gave her another of his slight nods. Thus began their silent partnership. Meals prepared, water fetched, garden tended, the rhythms of survival becoming a conversation without sound. 2 broken people moving around each other with careful respect for boundaries neither could articulate. Somewhere between sunset and moonrise, Eloise realized she had not spoken all day, nor had she missed the sound of her own voice. In silence there were no lies, no false pleasantries, no need to explain or defend. Just the truth of actions, of choice, of presence. For the first time in memory she slept without dreaming of escape. Days blended into one another, marked by routine that brought unexpected comfort. Each morning, Eloise woke to find Calder already tending the fire. Each night, she fell asleep to the sound of his knife against wood as he carved by firelight. Between dawn and dusk, They moved in the choreography of shared work, her domain increasingly the cabin and garden, his the heavier labor of chopping wood, hunting and repairing. She observed him closely, the wedding ring he still wore though his knuckles had grown thinner, the way he sometimes stopped mid-task to stare at the mountains as if seeing something beyond them. How he checked the trail down to town each morning and evening, vigilant without seeming fearful. Behind the cabin she discovered a small clearing where wildflowers grew around two graves, one larger, one heart-wrenchingly small. Fresh flowers had been placed there recently, suggesting a ritual of remembrance. She said nothing but returned with more wildflowers to add to those Calder had placed. When she returned to the cabin she found him watching her from the porch, his expression inscrutable. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to apologize for her intrusion but acknowledging its intimacy with a slight incline of her head. After a long moment, he nodded in return, then went back to mending a bridle, his long fingers working the leather with practiced ease. One evening while he was out hunting, curiosity led her to a trunk beneath his bed. She hesitated, knowing she was breaching his privacy, yet driven by a need to understand the silent man who had offered shelter without demand. Inside she found a woman's journal bound in soft leather. The handwriting was delicate, the words filled with love and daily observations of mountain life. April 15, 1882. Crocuses blooming by the stream today. Calder laughed when I insisted on gathering them for the table. His laugh is rare enough to be precious, like water in drought. Emma took her first steps alone, straight into her father's arms. The look on his face, I wish I could capture it somehow, save it against darker days. June 30, 1882, summer heat has come early. The garden thrives with Calder's careful tending. He built Emma a small pool in the stream where she splashes like a joyful otter. He teaches her the names of plants, of trees, of stars, his voice gentle in ways few ever hear. The final entry, dated September 8, 1882, simply read, "Fever still high. Calder hasn't slept in 3 days. I've never seen such fear in his eyes. Emma rests easier now, but her little hand burns like fire when I hold it. If God is merciful." The journal ended there. When Eloise looked up, Calder stood in the doorway, a freshly killed rabbit in hand. She expected anger, but his eyes held only a grief so profound it had no bottom. That night, for the first time, he sat beside her at the fire instead of across from her. October brought early frost, gilding the mountain world in silver each morning. They had fallen into patterns, comfortable yet still careful of each other's spaces. Calder hunted more frequently now, preparing for winter. Eloise preserved vegetables from the garden, learning through trial and error, finding satisfaction in jars of beans and tomatoes lined up on newly built shelves. One evening, as stars emerged in the indigo sky, Eloise sat on the porch steps, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the chill. Calder joined her, offering a cup of coffee laced with something stronger. She accepted with a small smile, one of many small gestures that had grown between them, building a language only they understood. They sat in companionable silence, watching their breath cloud the air. Then, surprising herself, Eloise spoke. Her voice, unused for so long, came rough and quiet. "I was property." Calder turned to look at her, his attention complete but undemanding. Slowly she rolled up her sleeve to reveal the ugly scar on her inner wrist, a cattle brand, the distinctive shape of the Morgan M, with a crown above it. "Judge Harlan Morgan owns half of Silverton County," she continued, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "His word is law, his church attendance impeccable, his reputation spotless." She told of her mother's death when she was 12, how she became her father's perfect hostess, managing his household, representing him at social functions. The perfect, obedient daughter who never questioned his authority or methods. "When I turned 25, she said, her voice hardening, he announced my engagement to Senator James Wheeler, his political ally, a man of 63 with 3 previous wives, all dead before 40. She described her refusal, her father's rage, the punishment that followed. Weeks locked in her room, fed only bread and water until she agreed. The whispered preparations for escape with the help of a sympathetic kitchen maid. 3 months of hiding, moving, surviving on her wits and the kindness of strangers who asked no questions. The posters call me unstable, dangerous, in need of medical confinement," she said bitterly. "My father doesn't tolerate disobedience, especially not public humiliation." She finally looked at Calder directly. "He won't stop looking." The unspoken question hung between them: would Calder grow tired of harboring a fugitive? Would he decide the risk wasn't worth whatever impulse had led him to help her? Without hesitation, Calder placed his hand over hers, the first intentional touch since that night in the alley. His message was clear: neither would he stop protecting. Eloise felt something shift inside her, a piece of her heart long frozen beginning to thaw. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through pine trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Eloise, hanging laundry on the line, spotted movement on the trail below, a rider approaching. Her heart stuttered with sudden fear. "Calder," she called softly, the name still unfamiliar on her tongue after weeks of silence. He emerged from the shed, instantly alert. One look at her face, a glance toward the trail, and he understood. With a gesture, he directed her inside. Through the window, Eloise watched as Sheriff Burns approached the cabin, his horse kicking up dust along the narrow trail. Calder met him at the fence line, his stance casual but alert. The conversation was one-sided, Burns doing all the talking while Calder listened impassively. Though she couldn't hear the words, she could read the sheriff's body language, the way he leaned forward in his saddle, the repeated gestures toward the town below. After several minutes, the sheriff produced a paper from his vest pocket. Even from a distance, Eloise recognized it, a wanted poster. Her poster. Cold fear spread through her chest. She had been found. Burns continued talking, his expression growing more serious. He pointed toward the cabin, then back at the poster, then gestured broadly as if encompassing the consequences of defiance. Calder remained unmoved, his posture neither confirming nor denying anything. Finally, the sheriff sighed visibly. He refolded the poster, tucked it away, and tipped his hat in reluctant farewell. As he turned his horse, he called something over his shoulder, a warning or a promise. Eloise couldn't tell. She retreated from the window as Calder walked back to the cabin. When he entered, his expression was grim. "He knows I'm here," she said. It wasn't a question. Calder nodded once. "What did he say?" Calder hesitated, then moved to a shelf where he kept paper and pencil. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant for such work-worn hands. "Judge Morgan's daughter reported missing. Reward offered. Sheriff suspects you're here but has no proof. Will return in 3 days." Eloise's hands trembled as she read the note. "Did he say what my father told them? Why he's looking for me?" Calder wrote again. "Claims you're not right in the head. Dangerous to yourself. Wants to help you." Bitter laughter escaped her. "Help me into a marriage with his ally. Or into an asylum if I refuse." She looked up at Calder, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He'll never stop. And now he'll come after you too for harboring me." Calder's expression didn't change, but his next words on paper were clear. "Let him try." For the first time since she'd arrived, Eloise saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes, not directed at her, but at the threat approaching from below. The moment the sheriff disappeared from view, Eloise was in motion, gathering the few belongings she'd acquired, the shawl, a hairbrush, a book of poetry she'd found on Calder's shelf. "I won't bring his vengeance down on you," she said, her voice tight with determination and barely controlled panic. "You've done more than enough already." When she turned, Calder blocked the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Please," she urged, trying to push past him. "You don't understand what he's capable of. My father has judges, politicians, lawmen in his pocket. He'll destroy anyone who stands in his way." Calder didn't budge. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a folded paper, a wanted poster. Her poster. The realization hit her like physical pain. "You've known all along." Her voice broke. "Why didn't you turn me in?" "The reward." Calder's response was to tear the poster in half, then quarters, then feed the pieces deliberately into the fire. He watched the fragments curl and blacken, then turned back to face her, his eyes holding a question she had no answer for. Why would anyone choose difficulty over profit? Choose a stranger's welfare over personal gain? "I can't stay," she insisted, though with less conviction. "They'll come back. With more men." Calder nodded his agreement, then gestured toward the window where the first snow had begun to fall. The meaning was clear: winter was coming. The mountain passes would soon be impassable. No one would reach them until spring thaw. Months of safety. Months to decide what came next. The fight went out of her. She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Calder shook his head, dismissing her concern. He went to his workbench and returned with something wrapped in soft cloth. When he placed it before her and unwrapped it, Eloise's breath caught. A pistol lay nestled in the fabric, small enough for her hand but deadly in its purpose. Beside it lay a carved wooden figure, a bird in flight. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken it aloud. She deserved both protection and freedom. The choice would be hers. That night, as they ate in silence, she studied his face in the firelight. The lines of grief were still there, the shadows of loss. But there was something else too: purpose. Resolve. In helping her, had he found a reason to continue? Was she a responsibility, a redemption, or simply a fellow traveler in a hard world? She didn't know. But for the first time in years, Eloise felt the unfamiliar weight of being valued for herself alone. A week passed in heightened vigilance. Between chores, Calder taught Eloise to shoot, not with words but with patient guidance, his hands occasionally adjusting her stance or grip. She proved a quick study, her determination making up for lack of experience. By the 5th day she could hit a pine cone at 30 paces more often than not. They established silent signals, escape routes. The cabin, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like the calm before an inevitable storm. At dawn on the 7th day the storm arrived, 6 riders approaching, dust billowing behind them despite the patches of early snow. Calder spotted them first, his posture stiffening as he checked the horses. One sharp whistle brought Eloise from the garden, her hand automatically moving to the small pistol she now kept in her pocket. She followed his gaze to the trail below and felt ice replace the blood in her veins. Not just the sheriff and deputies this time. There were other men in expensive suits whose bearing spoke of entitlement even at a distance. "It's him," she whispered. "Wheeler. Maybe my father too." Calder's face hardened. He gestured toward the back of the property, her last chance to run, to hide in the forest until they left. Eloise looked at the approaching riders, then at the cabin, the sanctuary that had become home. Somewhere in the past weeks she had stopped being afraid. Stopped being a victim. She shook her head. No more running. Something like pride flickered in Calder's eyes. He checked his own weapon, then offered his arm to escort her to the porch as if they were entering a grand ballroom rather than preparing for confrontation. The riders approached the fence line. The sheriff removed his hat, his expression caught between duty and reluctance. "Miss Morgan," he called. "Your father's been sick with worry." One of the suited men stepped forward, Senator Wheeler, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light, his eyes cold despite his smile. "My dear Eloise, this foolishness has gone on long enough." The second man, not her father but his lawyer Simmons, produced official-looking papers. "Judge Morgan has, with great reluctance, signed commitment papers. The Silverton Asylum for Troubled Women has a private room waiting." Wheeler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "After you're better, we can discuss our future." The deputies moved forward, hands on their weapons. The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Eloise felt Calder tense beside her, ready to place himself between her and danger. But something had changed in her. She was done being protected. Done being decided for. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." As tension stretched like an over-tightened wire, Wheeler made a sudden move toward Eloise, his facade of concern dropping away. "You belong to me now, girl," he snarled, reaching for her arm. "Your father signed the papers. You have no say in the matter." In that instant everything changed. Calder stepped forward, placing himself between Eloise and danger, but unexpectedly, Eloise moved alongside him rather than behind. Partners, not protector and protected. When the deputy closest to Wheeler reached for his gun, 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously, Calder's and to everyone's shock Eloise's. Her small pistol was steady in her hand as the deputy clutched his bleeding arm. Wheeler fell back, the hat shot clean off his head, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. The other deputies froze, hands hovering over their weapons. The sheriff raised his hands slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to cautious assessment. "Nobody needs to die today," he said carefully. The look of stunned disbelief on Wheeler's face mirrored the realization dawning in Eloise herself. She had acted without hesitation, without fear. The woman who had arrived in Dust River 2 months ago, beaten, cowed, desperate, was gone. Her voice, when it came, was strong and clear. "Tell my father that his daughter died the day he put his brand on me. I am not property to be claimed, sold, or confined." She met each man's eyes in turn. "I've chosen my path. Leave us in peace or the next bullets won't be warnings." The sheriff studied her face, then Calder's unwavering stance beside her. After a long moment he nodded slowly. "I'll tell him I found no trace of you north of the river. The rest is between you and your conscience." Wheeler began to protest, but the sheriff silenced him with a raised hand. "You want to die on this mountain, Senator? Because that's what'll happen if you push this." As they retreated, helping the wounded deputy onto his horse, Eloise's hands began to tremble with the enormity of what she'd done. The pistol slipped from her fingers. Calder caught it gently, then did something that transformed her world. He spoke, his voice rough from disuse but warm as sunlight on stone. "You're free now." 3 words breaking years of silence. A gift more precious than protection, than shelter, than safety. The acknowledgement of her strength, her worth, her right to choose. Eloise turned to him, tears finally breaking free as something long broken inside her began, tentatively, to heal. Not love, that was too simple a word for what existed between them. Something deeper, rarer. Recognition. Respect. The beginning of possibility. "We both are," she whispered. Time passed, marked by changing leaves, snow, then new growth. The cabin transformed, curtains at the windows, a porch swing, flowers breaking through the once barren soil. Inside, colorful quilts warmed the beds. On a summer evening, as fireflies rose from the meadow grass, Eloise stood at the edge of their land. Calder joined her, respectful of her space but present in her world. "Regrets?" he asked, the word gentle in the gathering dusk. Eloise smiled. "Only gratitude."